While the Voreni Empire possessed enough firepower to turn Earth into glass, their beloved princess was dying right on our watch, where a single diplomatic misstep meant human extinction. No one could have predicted, however, that a clumsy medical technician wielding a static shock would manage to achieve what an entire galaxy of advanced medicine failed to do. In the year 2142, humanity was not the apex predator of the cosmos. We were merely the nervous new tenants in a galaxy dominated by ancient star-faring dynasties. Chief among them was the Voreni Empire. When their armada dropped out of faster-than-light transit just past the orbit of Jupiter, the collective heart of Earth stopped beating. Their ships were leviathans of dark, jagged metal eclipsing the stars. They hadn't come to conquer, however. They had come out of desperation. The UN diplomatic station Aegis was hastily converted into a neutral meeting ground. Ambassador Richard Hayes, a seasoned diplomat who had spent his life negotiating water rights and border disputes on Earth, suddenly found himself negotiating for the survival of the human race. The Voreni Emperor, a terrifyingly imposing figure named Varric, had brought his daughter, Princess Kaelin. Kaelin was afflicted with what the Voreni called the Void Blight, a progressive, incurable cellular degradation that slowly crystallized their nervous systems. The Voreni, despite their mastery of physics and warfare, had hit a biological wall. Their immune systems were too perfectly engineered, too stagnant. They had sought out humanity not because we were advanced, but because of our reputation in the galactic underground. Humans were biologically chaotic. We survived diseases, radiation, and toxins that would liquidate other species. Emperor Varric hoped our crude, aggressive biology held a cure. Thomas Granger was the last person who should have been in the room. Thomas wasn't a renowned geneticist or a brilliant surgeon. He was a telemetry technician, a 32-year-old guy from Chicago who had washed out of advanced xenobiology due to a lack of funding. His job on the Aegis was painfully simple: monitor the human-made environmental systems in the alien isolation ward to ensure the oxygen-nitrogen mix didn't accidentally suffocate the royal guests. He was invisible, a ghost in a sterile white jumpsuit, holding a datapad and trying not to draw the attention of the 7-foot-tall, armored Voreni royal guards flanking the room. The medbay was a theater of controlled panic. Princess Kaelin lay on a diagnostic bed that hovered a few inches off the floor. Her skin, normally a luminescent pale sapphire, was mottled with dark, creeping crystalline veins. Her breathing was a ragged, mechanical rattle. Around her, the best minds of two civilizations clashed in futile desperation. Dr. Evelyn Carter, humanity's leading xenobiologist, was arguing with Chief Physician Saren of the Voreni. "Her neural pathways are collapsing, Saren," Dr. Carter shouted over the blaring of the telemetry alarms. "If we introduce a localized cortical steroid, we might buy her a few hours." Saren, a tall, gaunt alien with 4 primary eyes that darted with frantic energy, dismissed her with a wave of a long, multi-jointed hand. "Your primitive steroids will accelerate the crystallization. Her biomatrix is rejecting all foreign compounds. We have tried heavy metal synthesis, plasma infusion. She is fading. The blight has reached her heart." Emperor Varric stood at the foot of the bed. He wore no crown, only a heavy mantle of woven metallic fibers, but the air around him felt physically heavy with authority. His deep, resonant voice cut through the alarms. "You promised me a miracle, Ambassador Hayes. You told me the chaotic mud of your homeworld bred survivors." Ambassador Hayes swallowed hard, his face pale. "Your Majesty, our doctors are doing everything within their power, but our physiology is vastly different. We need more time to sequence her." "There is no more time," Saren interrupted, his voice dropping to a mournful whisper. The monitors behind the princess shifted from a rapid, chaotic pulse to a slow, agonizing thud. The luminescent blue glow of Kaelin's skin began to dim, turning a sickly ash-gray. The room fell into a terrifying silence, save for the single drawn-out tone of the life support monitor. A flat line. "She is returning to the ancestral void," Saren chanted softly, bowing his head. The royal guards immediately dropped to one knee, their heavy armor clanking against the deck plates. Emperor Varric did not kneel. He stared at his daughter, his eyes wide, and then slowly turned his gaze toward Ambassador Hayes. The grief in his eyes was instantly eclipsed by a cold, apocalyptic rage. Humanity had failed. The implicit threat that hung over the entire summit was about to become a reality. In the background, Thomas Granger was panicking. The environmental monitors were synced to the alien's life support. When Kalen flatlined, a localized power surge tripped the relays in Thomas's console. Sparks showered from the ventilation control unit above the princess's bed. Acting on pure instinct to prevent a fire from breaking out over the dying royal, Thomas lunged forward. He scrambled over a tangle of diagnostic cables, reaching for the manual override switch on the wall panel just behind her hovering bed. His boot caught on a heavy plasma line. Thomas lost his balance. He pitched forward, dropping his datapad, his arms flailing for purchase. He didn't hit the floor. Instead, his bare right hand slammed squarely onto the exposed chest of Princess Kalen, right over her failing crystallized heart. The royal guards roared in fury, instantly rising, their weapons charging with a blinding purple light. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the blast of plasma that would vaporize him. Instead, there was a sound like a cracking whip. Snap! A massive arc of blue static electricity discharged from Thomas's hand, bridging the gap between human skin and alien flesh. The shock was so violent, it threw Thomas backward, sending him crashing into Dr. Carter and sending them both tumbling to the sterile floor. Insolent primate! General Corrin, the commander of the Royal Guard, bellowed. He leveled his heavy plasma rifle directly at Thomas's chest. You dare defile the princess in her final passage? Wait, look! Dr. Carter screamed, not at the guns, but at the diagnostic array. The flatline tone had stopped. The room froze. General Corrin's finger hovered over the trigger. Emperor Varric spun back toward the medical bed. Thump! Thump! It was faint at first, then rapidly growing stronger. The monitors, previously blinking in the red hues of a systemic failure, suddenly flared with golden, rhythmic peaks. On the bed, Princess Kalen's body arched. Her eyes, shut tight in the grip of the coma, snapped open. She took a massive, shuddering gasp of air, her chest heaving as if she had just broken the surface of a deep ocean. The dark, creeping crystals that had suffocated her veins were doing something impossible. They were melting. Where Thomas's hand had struck her, a brilliant, healthy blue bioluminescence was pulsing outward like a ripple in a pond. It chased the dark gray ash of the void blight down her arms, down her neck, receding rapidly. Saren, the Vareni physician, dropped his medical tablet. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't notice. He rushed to the bedside, his 4 eyes wide in absolute disbelief, running his scanners over her rapidly stabilizing vitals. This is an impossibility, Saren stammered, his voice trembling. Her neural matrix is. It is rebooting. The crystallization is dissolving into harmless, inert proteins. Her heart rate is at 90% optimal capacity. Princess Kalen blinked, looking confusedly at the ceiling, then turned her head to look at her father. Father, I do not feel the cold anymore. Emperor Varric fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in his daughter's hand, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The tension in the room shattered, replaced by a profound, echoing shock. Thomas Granger groaned, rubbing his elbow where he had hit the deck. He looked up, expecting to be executed. Instead, he found the entire room staring at him, not with anger, but with an intense, terrifying awe. "What did you do?" Dr. Carter whispered, grabbing Thomas by the collar of his jumpsuit. "Thomas, what the hell did you just inject her with?" "Nothing, I swear, Doc." Thomas stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I tripped, I shocked her. You know, static electricity? I was rubbing my boots on the carpet in the corridor before I came in here." Static electricity. Saren repeated, the universal translator struggling to convey the utter bewilderment in his tone. A microvoltage discharge? We hit her with defibrillating blasts of pure plasma, and it did nothing. It wasn't just the electricity, Doctor, Carter said, her mind racing as she grabbed a portable dermal scanner and shoved it against Thomas's hand. She looked at the readouts, her eyes widening. It's the H5 factor. The what? Ambassador Hayes asked, stepping forward cautiously. Human physiology, Mr. Ambassador, Carter breathed, looking at Thomas like he was a walking deity. We've known that the Vareni biology is incredibly sterile, almost crystalline in its perfection. But they lack our messy, chaotic bioelectric resonance. Thomas here is sweating. He's stressed. She pulled up the data onto the main holographic projector. Look at this. Human sweat contains trace amounts of sodium, potassium, and lactic acid. Combined with the friction of his fall, he generated a triboelectric charge. But it was how that charge was delivered. The microflora on his skin, the specific frequency of human body heat, and the sudden jolt of raw, unfiltered biological electricity acted as a catalyst. Dr. Carter looked at Saren. Your medicine is too clean, Saren. Her body didn't need a perfectly synthesized cure. It needed a biological jumpstart, a chaotic, dirty, high-voltage reboot to shock her immune system out of its stasis. Thomas didn't cure her. His touch forced her own body to fight back. General Corrin slowly lowered his weapon. The aggressive posture of the Vareni guards shifted entirely. They looked at Thomas, the scruffy, underpaid telemetry technician, as if he were a supreme biological weapon. You mean to tell me, Emperor Varric said, his voice rumbling as he stood up, never taking his eyes off Thomas, that this low-caste technician possesses the cure to the void blight in his very skin? Not just him, Doctor, Carter corrected gently, a small smile playing on her lips. Any human. Our bodies are walking bioelectric batteries, constantly shedding microorganisms and generating resonant fields. To you, we might seem primitive, but to your immune systems, a human touch is the equivalent of a supernova. The political implications crashed into the room heavier than any dreadnought. Humanity was no longer a mud-dwelling species begging for mercy. We were the sole possessors of the only thing the Vareni Empire could not build, buy, or conquer, the breath of life. Emperor Varric walked slowly toward Thomas. Thomas scrambled backward, hitting the wall, terrified of the towering alien. Varric stopped 2 feet away. The room held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, the Emperor of 1,000-star systems lowered his head, placed his fist over his heart, and bowed to Thomas Granger. You have given me back my universe, Varric said softly. The Vareni Empire is in your debt. Name your price, Healer Granger. Thomas swallowed hard, looking from the bowing Emperor to the utterly dumbfounded face of Ambassador Hayes. Thomas squeaked. Maybe a promotion? But the story of Thomas Granger didn't end with a simple bow and a peaceful treaty. In fact, the absolute miracle of his touch was about to trigger the most dangerous political crisis the galaxy had ever seen. Because while the Emperor saw a savior, others in the Vareni High Command saw humanity as something else entirely, a resource that needed to be harvested. The immediate aftermath of Princess Kaelin's miraculous revival was a whirlwind of intoxicating triumph. Earth's media, fed sanitized feeds from the UN diplomatic station Aegis, heralded the dawn of a new glorious era. Humanity wasn't going to be exterminated. We were the galaxy's exclusive biological engineers. Thomas Granger was relocated from his cramped, windowless spunk in the engineering sector to the ambassadorial wing. He was given a tailored suit, a personal security detail led by UN Captain David Miller, and a seat at the right hand of Ambassador Richard Hayes. For exactly 72 hours, Thomas lived the life of a supreme dignitary, sipping synthetic champagne while Vareni nobles looked at him with an unsettling mix of reverence and hunger. But behind the gilded doors of the summit, the atmosphere was rapidly curdling. Dr. Evelyn Carter had spent the last 3 days running continuous simulations, trying to synthesize a mechanical version of the human bioelectric touch. Every attempt failed. The Vareni immune system was too complex, too alienated from natural evolutionary friction. It rejected artificial currents and synthesized flora. It required a living, breathing, sweating human to act as a biological tuning fork. This inescapable fact did not sit well with the Vareni High Command. General Corin, the towering commander of the Royal Guard, viewed the situation through the cold, calculating lens of a conqueror. To him, an empire spanning 1,000 star systems could not rely on the fragile goodwill of primitive primates. Thomas first noticed something was wrong through sheer habit. Despite his elevated status, he was still a telemetry technician at heart. Unable to sleep on the unnervingly soft anti-gravity mattress in his VIP suite, he had requested his old datapad to tinker with. He linked it to the station's passive environmental sensors, just for background noise. At SU-200 hours, he noticed a discrepancy in the atmospheric pressure readings of the lower hangar bays. The Vareni troop transports, which were supposed to be dormant, were venting thermal exhaust. They were spinning up their engines. Furthermore, the internal security cameras in the Vareni wing had been partitioned off from the UN mainframes. Thomas threw on his clothes and slipped out of his quarters, bypassing his sleeping guards. He hurried down the sterile, steel-paneled corridors to the medical wing where Dr. Carter was still working. "Evelyn," Thomas hissed, sealing the door behind him. "Something's wrong. The Vareni are prepping their dropships." Dr. Carter looked up, rubbing her bloodshot eyes. The holographic displays around her were flashing with aggressive, jagged red lines. "Thomas, I was just about to wake the ambassador. I managed to crack the encryption on Saren's medical logs from this morning. They aren't looking for a cure anymore." "What do you mean?" "Corin and a faction of the High Council have classified humanity. We are no longer designated as a sovereign species." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "They've reclassified us as a classer biological resource, a raw material." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. "Like medicine, like livestock," she corrected grimly. "Corin's logic is terrifyingly practical. Why negotiate with Earth for a handful of healers when you can subjugate the planet, harvest our population, and distribute us across the Vareni Empire as living medical batteries? They plan to farm us, Thomas, keep us in a constant state of mild stress to maximize our bioelectric output, just to cure their elites of the void blight." Before Thomas could respond, the heavy reinforced doors of the medical lab violently hissed open. General Corin stood in the doorway, flanked by 6 heavily armed royal guards. Their armor, usually a pristine silver, was now active, humming with a dark, threatening violet energy field. "Dr. Carter, Technician Granger," Corin rumbled, his voice devoid of the earlier awe. "It is time for your relocation. We are under the protection of Ambassador Hayes and Emperor Varek, Doctor," Carter stated, backing away toward the surgical tables, her hands desperately reaching for a comms panel. "The ambassador has been detained for his own safety," Corin replied smoothly, "and the Emperor's grief has clouded his judgment. He has grown weak, too attached to the sentimentality of an alliance with inferiors. The High Council has invoked the Preservation Edict. Varek is currently being contained for the good of the Empire. They were staging a coup, and Earth was the prize." "You're making a mistake, Corin," Thomas said, his voice cracking slightly. "Our government will fight back." Corin laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Fight with what? Your kinetic slug throwers? Your primitive nuclear toys? We will glass your military installations from orbit and scoop up your civilian populations by the millions. You will be housed in sterile environments, kept safe, kept alive, and used to ensure the Vareni never suffer from the blight again. You should be honored. You will become eternal." 2 guards stepped forward, raising heavy restraint collars designed for Vareni beasts. "Take the female to the primary transport," Corin ordered. "The male, the catalyst, bring him to my personal dreadnought. He will serve the High Council directly." Captain David Miller suddenly burst from the adjacent observation room, his standard-issue sidearm drawn. He fired 3 rounds center mass at the nearest guard. The bullets sparked and flattened harmlessly against the Voreni energy shields. "Run, Thomas!" Miller shouted, diving behind a medical console. The guards didn't even flinch. One of them raised a plasma rifle and fired a concussive blast that caught Miller in the shoulder, throwing the UN captain brutally against the bulkhead. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. "A pathetic display," Corin sneered. He pointed a long, armored finger at Thomas. "Restrain him." As the guards advanced, Thomas's eyes darted frantically around the room. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't know how to shoot, but he knew telemetry. He knew environmental systems, and he knew exactly what had saved the princess 3 days ago. Human biology is a chaotic high-voltage reboot. Thomas didn't run toward the door. He turned and lunged for the central environmental control terminal that dictated the atmospheric conditions of the entire med bay. "Evelyn, the scrubbers!" Thomas yelled as his fingers flew across the glass display, bypassing the safety protocols. Dr. Carter instantly understood. She dove under a desk, ripping out the primary grounding wires for the room's diagnostic arrays. "Stop him!" Corin barked. A guard lunged, his massive hand clamping down on Thomas's shoulder, tearing the fabric of his suit. But Thomas had already executed the command. Override code Delta 9er. Humidity 0%. Oxygen concentration 60%. Ambient temperature decreasing to freezing. Instantly, the heavy vents in the ceiling shrieked as they sucked every ounce of moisture out of the air. The room became bone-dry, freezing cold and hyper-oxygenated in a matter of seconds. The hairs on Thomas's arms stood straight up. The friction of the dry air against the synthetic floor, combined with the electrical fields of the Voreni armor, turned the entire room into a massive, invisible capacitor. "What is this?" The guard holding Thomas growled, looking at his violet energy shield, which was beginning to flicker and spit tiny sparks. "This is Chicago winters, you son of a bitch," Thomas spat. He wrenched himself out of the guard's grip, intentionally dragging his rubber-soled boots across the sterile polymer flooring, generating a massive triboelectric charge in his own body. The stress, the terror, the adrenaline, it all compounded the human bioelectric resonance. Corin raised his plasma pistol, aiming directly at Thomas's chest. "End him. We have billions more on the planet below." "No!" a voice roared from the corridor. Princess Kaelin, wearing a sleek environmental suit, stumbled into the doorway. Behind her, bloodied but unbowed, stood Emperor Varric. He was gripping a heavy ceremonial blade, and the bodies of several mutinous guards lay in the hallway behind him. "Corin, stand down," Varric thundered, his eyes burning with fury. Corin hesitated, his pistol wavering between the Emperor and Thomas. "My Emperor, I am saving our species from your weakness." In that microsecond of distraction, Thomas saw his opening. He didn't attack Corin. He charged at the exposed, ungrounded diagnostic server rack Dr. Carter had stripped. Thomas slammed both of his bare hands onto the heavy metallic frame, grounding himself and completing the circuit. The result was catastrophic for the Voreni technology. The hyperdry air, the concentrated oxygen, and the sudden massive introduction of raw human bioelectricity created an electrostatic discharge of localized, devastating proportions. It wasn't just a spark. It was an EMP fueled by raw biological chaos. A blinding flash of blue lightning erupted from Thomas, traveling through the floor plating and arcing violently into the heavily shielded boots of the Voreni guards. The Voreni armor was designed to deflect plasma fire and radiation, but it was perfectly crystalline and rigid in its energy distribution. It could not handle the dirty, chaotic surging frequency of a human bioelectric overload. Crack boom, the sound was deafening. The violet shields of the guards shattered like glass. Their heavy armor seized, the internal circuits frying instantly in a cascade of sparking, smoking ruin. The massive soldiers dropped to the floor, completely paralyzed by the sudden short circuit of their combat suits. Corin roared in pain as his plasma pistol overloaded, exploding in his hand. He stumbled backward, his armor smoking, completely defenseless. Emperor Varric did not hesitate. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides. With a swift, brutal motion, he drove the hilt of his ceremonial blade into Corin's jaw, sending the towering general crashing to the floor, unconscious. The medbay fell deathly silent, save for the hiss of the environmental vents and the groans of the paralyzed mutineers. Thomas collapsed onto his knees, his hand smoking slightly, his entire body trembling from the adrenaline dump and the electrical discharge. He gasped for breath in the freezing dry air. Dr. Carter crawled out from under the desk, rushing to check on Captain Miller, who was groaning and blinking his eyes open. Emperor Varric stood over Corin's body, his chest heaving. He looked at the smoking, ruined armor of his elite guard, and then turned his gaze to Thomas. The Emperor slowly deactivated his blade. "I believed your people were a cure, Thomas Granger," Varric said, his deep voice echoing in the ruined room. "I see now I was mistaken. You are not a cure." Thomas looked up, exhausted, expecting the worst. "You are a force of nature," Varric finished, extending a massive hand to help Thomas to his feet. "And nature cannot be caged." Princess Kaelin rushed forward, looking at Thomas in absolute awe. "You weaponized your own life force." "I just weaponized static," Thomas breathed, leaning heavily against the console. "We humans, we don't do well in cages." The ensuing weeks reshaped the galaxy forever. The coup was brutally crushed by Varric's loyalists. The High Council faction that viewed humans as livestock was dissolved, its members exiled to the outer asteroid belts of the Vareni system. Ambassador Richard Hayes, once released, found his negotiating position radically altered. Earth was no longer negotiating from a place of weakness or desperation. We weren't just a fragile species holding a medical secret. We were an incredibly dangerous, biologically chaotic anomaly that could short-circuit Vareni war machines with a handshake and a bad mood. The Treaty of Aegis was signed not as an act of charity by the Vareni, but as a mutual pact between 2 terrifying superpowers. The Vareni provided Earth with faster-than-light technology, advanced terraforming algorithms, and a seat on the Galactic Senate. In exchange, humanity provided a strictly voluntary, highly paid medical corps. Thousands of humans, mostly college students, off-duty paramedics, and retail workers looking for an absurd paycheck, were deployed across the Vareni Empire. They became known as the Storm Bringers. Their job was simple: walk into a Vareni hospital, get slightly stressed about the terrifying alien environment, generate a sweat, and give sick Vareni elites a solid, static-filled high five. As for Thomas Granger, he declined a position in the new Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Instead, he took his exorbitant Vareni consultant fee and moved back to Chicago. He bought a small, heavily insulated house near Lake Michigan. Sometimes, when the winter air got incredibly dry and he walked across his living room carpet in thick woolen socks, he would reach out and touch the brass doorknob. The sharp, cracking shock would make him flinch, and then he would smile. It was just static. But to the rest of the universe, it was the spark that brought humanity to the stars. What would you do if your most annoying daily habit became the most powerful weapon in the galaxy? Humanity's messy, chaotic nature might just be our greatest strength. If you enjoyed this journey of static shocks, alien empires, and the ultimate underdog victory, hit that like button, share this story with a friend who always shocks you in the winter, and subscribe for more epic, original sci-fi tales every week. The universe is waiting.